Before we go,
Dana and Bill, this is a Fox News alert now. Major pushback against the new report on President Biden's Afghanistan withdrawal, particularly its timing. The White House is pointing fingers and shirking responsibility for the tragic loss of life that accompanied the operation. This is the Faulkner Focus. I'm Jillian Turner in New York City in for Harris today. Well, the 12-page after-action review defends President Biden's decision-making while blaming the Trump administration. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said this.
For all this talk of chaos, I just didn't see it, not from my perch. At one point during the evacuation, there was an aircraft taking off full of people, Americans and Afghans alike, every 48 minutes. And not one single mission was missed. So I'm sorry, I just won't buy the whole argument of chaos.
Well, the events at Abbey Gate and along the tarmac showed Afghans hanging onto and falling off planes as they took off, even handing babies to U.S. troops over razor wire. As we all know, 13 American service members were tragically killed in a suicide bombing at the airport. The White House released the latest report just minutes before President Biden decamped to Camp David for the Easter weekend. Some in the press corps yesterday ripped that timing. Listen.
I think I speak on behalf of my colleagues in this room when we want the record to reflect this was sent to us about 10 minutes before the briefing began with little notice, and it's the very definition of a modern major holiday news dump. Releasing this at the beginning of the high holidays and after months of requests from Republicans and the broader public. So why today? And is this all we get?
Let's bring in Lucas Tomlinson. He's at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue this morning. Hi, Lucas.
Jillian, former President Donald Trump's Secretary of State wasted little time firing back, saying his administration left a playbook behind how to withdraw from Afghanistan, but it was ignored.
They sabotaged a plan that we had put in place that was conditions-based. They came in, took the plan that we had, and just botched it. They made a hash of it, and the American people have suffered for it. And frankly, America's standing in the world is continuing to suffer from that today.
President Biden's approval rating has never recovered from the hasty withdrawal from Afghanistan. As you can see here, it has been underwater ever since. 13 U.S. service members were killed in a suicide attack, and over 100 Afghan civilians desperately trying to flee the country were also killed in that attack. A U.S. drone strike days later killed 10 Afghan civilians, including 7 children by mistake. The 12-page report released yesterday said the evacuation should have started much sooner and put the blame on Donald Trump. Quote, President Biden's choices for how to execute a withdrawal from Afghanistan were severely constrained by conditions created by his predecessor. You mentioned, Jillian, these images of thousands of Afghans desperate to board the C-17 transport plane has been seared into many people's memories. President Biden had promised a month before the evacuation would not look like the fall of Saigon.
There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of a embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. It is not at all comfortable.
And nowhere in the report does it mention that President Biden's top commanders had warned against pulling all American forces out of Afghanistan. Jillian.
Lucas Tomlinson at the White House for us. Thank you. Take a look at this. Flashback now to President Biden speaking in the immediate aftermath of the withdrawal.
Mr. President, there had not been a U.S. service member killed in combat in Afghanistan since February of 2020. You set a deadline, you pulled troops out, you sent troops back in, and now 12 Marines are dead. You said the buck stops with you. Do you bear any responsibility for the way that things have unfolded in the last 2 weeks?
I bear responsibility for fundamentally all that's happened of late.
Let's bring in Molly Hemingway. She's a Fox News contributor, also editor-in-chief of The Federalist. Molly, lot to unpack here. Let's start with this. The NSC and the broader White House has always insisted that they measure the success of this operation by the number of Americans and Afghans who they saved. What do you say to that?
Well, you know, this decision to leave the Afghanistan war is the only thing that is popular about how we exited the Afghanistan war. There's broad agreement that that needed to happen. You saw that bipartisan agreement. And President Biden is trying to take credit for that decision, which originally came from President Trump, and not take any accountability or responsibility for the manner in which this happened. The manner in which it happened was something that was heartbreaking for so many Americans to see. And so I think, you know, if he wants to take credit for it, he needs to take responsibility for all of the problems that happened. And you just didn't hear that. I'm glad you mentioned the 11 Marines, the Navy corpsmen, the soldier who were killed in that attack. This report does not explain the decisions that led to that, and does not recommend firing anybody who was responsible for these decisions. It's a shock, I think, for Americans to see this type of report after we all experienced that.
Now, what the report does include on line 3 is the declaration that the U.S. accomplished its mission in Afghanistan. That's verbatim. Now, Molly, they say the goal of the mission and the broader war was to remove the 9/11 terrorists from battlefield, which admittedly happened, but nowhere in the report is there mention of the reality, which is that those same terrorists once again infiltrated and then took over the governing apparatus inside the country.
Well, this really speaks to a much bigger issue in how our military has not taken responsibility for how it prosecuted this war. When it began, it had a very limited objective. It was in response to Afghanistan harboring these terrorists who committed 9/11. We took care of that in very short order and did a very good job in the first 18 months, 2 years. It then morphed into this expansive democracy-building exercise, which by all accounts was a failure, as evidenced by the fact that we handed the country back over to the Taliban, as you note, and it was very expensive. It cost so many lives, and it led to a lot of confusion in what the purpose of our military is. At the end of the day, not only does the Taliban take control, we leave billions of dollars of equipment in their hands. We had this disastrous withdrawal. We still have Americans and allies that are there that have not been taken care of. It's very implausible to talk about this as a great success given those facts.
Now, what about the Afghans? Because another key argument from the administration here is that they reiterated this yesterday, they have made life better for tens of millions of Afghans. Is that the case?
I mean, I think if you're arguing that our approach to building democracy in Afghanistan succeeded, I don't see the facts on the ground supporting that case. You look at, by our own metrics, and I mean, I'm not a supporter of this idea that you should turn our military into a democracy building or nation building entity, but
because it fails every time.
It doesn't work so well usually. But that did not take place in Afghanistan. You see it by our own standards of what we would want to see in terms of women being educated or other issues. It just didn't happen.
Now, weeks after this unfolded, the then Pentagon spokesperson, who was John Kirby, joined Harris on this program. Take a listen to their exchange.
Are we still relying on the Taliban?
This isn't about relying on the Taliban. This is about working with these aid groups and helping identify people that need to get out of Afghanistan and getting them out.
So the Taliban are not helping us do that.
They are still getting out of Afghanistan. These people are still getting out. And look, we know we have work to do. And here at the Department of Defense, we know we have a moral obligation.
But I didn't hear an answer to the question. Are we still working with the Taliban?
This isn't about relying or working with the Taliban.
What do you make of that?
I mean, it was what was so surprising about seeing how Kirby handled this press conference yesterday. He was at the Pentagon at the time of the withdrawal. I remember him talking about how that drone strike, which Lucas Tomlinson talked about, which inadvertently made the mistake of killing an innocent Afghan family, including 7 children. He was the one from the podium saying that was a military objective that had been achieved, that they believed that they were terrorist related. He himself talked about the chaos in the pullout from Afghanistan, and then yesterday is saying he doesn't know what they're talking about. It is a very difficult scenario because the Taliban are in charge of the country, so of course we're working with them on trying to resolve all the outstanding issues. I don't know why he was denying it then, or really what happened yesterday in that press conference.
Yeah, we could carry on with this all afternoon, I'm sure, Molly, but I want to make sure I get your take on this while I have you. The Tennessee State House yesterday voted to expel those 2 Democratic lawmakers, Reps Justin Jones and Justin Pearson. Republicans ruled that they violated decorum after they led a protest on the House floor. Take a listen.
You who believe in justice and advocacy and who believe in democracy, thank you.
Those protests happened obviously in the wake of the recent Nashville school shooting at Covenant. Hundreds descended on the Capitol building, chanting for lawmakers to impose new gun control measures. One Democrat tore into his GOP colleagues after the expulsions. Listen to what he said.
Give me a break. Is this a circus? You are talking about kicking somebody out of this body. Grow up. If you can't sit through a conversation or a debate on something no less than expelling a colleague, grow up. Get out of here. You don't belong here. You want to call the question?
Well, President Biden condemned Republicans in a statement last night, saying the expulsion of lawmakers who engaged in peaceful protest is shocking, undemocratic, and without precedent. Molly, what do you say?
Yeah, the legislature was not pleased with these members for how they helped this unruly protest. And they didn't just engage in the type of behavior that you might expect of members of Congress. They had bullhorns, they were egging on the protesters, and the legislature is not tolerating that. Now, it's not just this incident. There's actually a history with these two members of them engaging in bad behavior in the legislature that I think played a major role here. But whenever there's a horrible attack like we saw in this shooting at the Covenant School, people try to exploit it for political action, and the legislature there seems to be saying we will continue to do our work, we won't be bullied, we won't be dealing with unruly protests like this, and we cannot condone this type of behavior. But yeah, it does seem to have very high-level Democrats upset, including former President Barack Obama, which suggests that they're really stung by this sort of surprising action from the Republican-led legislature.
And we also know from our own reporters, Molly, that all three of those members anticipated sort of penalties, consequences. None of them anticipated they might actually lose their jobs. Got to leave it there. Molly, thanks so much for taking time with us.
Thank you.
So take a look at this. A new jobs report is out. The numbers show signs of slowing, though the labor market is still relatively strong. Some economists, though, worry the new growth could push the Fed to hit the U.S. with yet another round of interest rate hikes, or at least not prevent them. The IRS is also out with a brand new plan detailing how the agency plans to spend those billions of new dollars it just got. A warning to middle-class Americans. Listen.
This is way more money, $80 billion, than the IRS even knows what to do with. How they're really going to stay away from Americans reporting income less than $400,000.
Republicans say they're worried the IRS will not just be targeting the rich. We've got Steve Moore in Focus coming up next. Another Fox News alert now. March's jobs report is in. The labor market is still strong, though the rate of job growth is now decidedly cooling. The economy added 236,000 jobs over the last month. The unemployment rate dipped slightly to 3.5%. Economists flag now the numbers keep pressure on the Fed to continue raising interest rates in order to fight high inflation. When and if it does, that's going to mark the 10th straight hike. Fox Business correspondent Ed Lawrence is here to break it all down for us. Hey, Ed.
Hey, Jillian, 70% of the market now believes that there will still be a 0.25% interest rate hike at the next meeting. This jobs report is exactly what the Federal Reserve wanted to see. The last time the economy added back 236,000 jobs was in December of 2020. You see the job trends, though, over the past couple months. The average hourly wage is up 4.2% year over year. That number's slowing, but CPI inflation at 6%. And that means Americans still struggling to pay for things.
I think a lot of policy mistakes have actually restrained what should have been a mighty expansion by now in the economy. If you look at all of the forecasts, the Congressional Budget Office, the blue chip forecasts, they're for 1 to 2% growth for the next 4, 5, 6 years. That's terrible. We should be growing much faster than that.
And that's what Steve Moore told Fox Business earlier. The president touting manufacturing jobs at every stop on his Investing in America tour. For the second month in a row, though, manufacturing lost 1,000 jobs. Construction lost 9,000 jobs. Retail lost about 15,000 jobs. Leisure and hospitality added 72,000 jobs, leading the way for the growth in this report. Now, as the Federal Reserve fights inflation with interest rate increases, the employment will slow. The International Monetary Fund warning that global the economy is facing years of slow employment and growth.
Last year, we have been saying, look, there is simply no way that interest rates would go up so much after being low for so long, and there would be no vulnerabilities. Something is going to go boom.
And in a statement about this report, President Joe Biden saying that his policies are creating good jobs that families can raise a family on. The statement does not mention, Jillian, inflation. Back to you.
Ed Lawrence at the White House for us this hour. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Well, the number of job openings ticked down a bit to less than 10 million, but still greatly outpacing monthly hiring figures. A new op-ed with the title, "Hey, Uncle Sam, Stop Paying People for Not Working" is out now. Here's the author of that piece, Steve Moore, former economic advisor to President Trump and FreedomWorks chief economist. Steve, last month you told me we got to pay attention not just to the numbers, but to what kinds of jobs the economy is creating. Can you read those tea leaves for us with the latest round of numbers?
Hi, Jillian. Well, happy Easter weekend. Good news and bad news in this report. The good news is that the jobs are out there. You're right. We have 9.6 million job openings still in this country and about 5 million people looking for jobs. So if you've got skills and you really want to work, you can find work. And so that's good news for the American worker. The bad news, Jillian, is something we've talked about on this show month after month after month now for 20 months, which is that we have this continuing trend of inflation continuing to outpace people's wages. So people are getting poorer. So when President Biden says that the middle class is doing so much better, actually, no, they're not. They're falling behind by about $3,000 since Biden came into office. So I think that's the real curse right now. And don't forget, the OPEC countries this week, Jillian, announced that they're going to cut oil production. What happened to the oil price? It went up. What does that mean for people paying gas at the pump? It means you're going to pay more. So I don't know if we've totally solved this inflation puzzle.
All right, we're going to pick up on the OPEC thread in just a moment, Steve. The IRS released also its plan for spending $80 billion in new funding. It got that money was provided by the Inflation Reduction Act. The agency is adding 87,000 new employees. The report worked to downplay criticism that the move will drive up audits on middle-class families. The Wall Street Journal raising big questions now, writing, quote, "When taxpayers underreport income, it's hard to know who's rich and who's middle class." It also points out it's cheaper, faster, and easier for the IRS to audit lower income Americans. More bang for its buck. There's also this harsh reality.
Long-held truth of taxes, which is that there just aren't enough rich people to soak to clear the deficit that exists today. You have to go after the enormous middle class to get that money, and that's where the IRS is probably going to end up.
You agree, Steve? The IRS has to go after the middle class?
Yeah, what's the old saying from Willie Sutton? Why do you rob banks? And he says, because that's where the money is. Well, guess what, Jillian? This is a middle class country. You know, we do have a lot of rich people, a lot of millionaires and billionaires, but still, most of the money in this country is in the hands of the middle class. So there's no question that middle class people will be subject to more intensive audits, and that's no fun. I went through a 6-year audit with the IRS until they finally dropped the case and said I didn't owe them the money that they claimed that I did. But I think there's a bigger point here for conservatives than just the fact that they're coming after the middle class. They will target, there's no question about this, the Biden administration will target and weaponize the IRS against conservatives and Republicans. We know this because that's exactly what they did under Barack Obama. We know that they've been spending special time going after people who disagree with them politically. And that's why I think this idea of 87,000 new IRS agents is very dangerous. Republicans have to pull the funding for that.
Well, I got to flag that the Biden administration from the White House podium has pushed back on that criticism multiple times. They say no truth to the idea that they target conservatives for audits. But Steve, take a look at this. Oil.
Hold on, Jillian, let me just say something about that. They already did. They already did that. We know that from the Biden administration. Well, Lois Lerner basically targeted conservative organizations. For them to say, oh, we would never do that. Folks, they already did.
Steve, take a look at this. Less oil, higher gas prices is not stopping the administration from a plan to crack down on gas-powered vehicles. Bloomberg reports that Team Biden will slap stricter emission rules on vehicles, but stop just short of a complete electric vehicle mandate. This comes after OPEC, as you mentioned, Steve, announced plans to cut oil output by 100 million barrels a day. And the House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is putting the blame on the president. Listen to what he said.
You look what OPEC just did. Based upon Biden administration policies, we're now weaker because he's attacking energy in America. He's making OPEC stronger, and they're dictating what the price is going to be.
Prices are up in 43 states this week alone.
Yeah, there's no question about this. You know, I work for Donald Trump. We talked a lot about energy policy. His policy had made America not just energy independent, but the energy dominant country in the world by the time he left office. Biden came in. He basically told the American people that he was going to try to bankrupt the oil and gas companies because of this radical climate agenda. And so now people should realize every time you go to the gas pump, you're paying about $1 a gallon climate change tax because the prices are so high. And what's really especially frustrating to me, Jillian, is that, you know, when Donald Trump was president, we didn't even talk about OPEC. OPEC had no power because the United States was the dominant country in terms of oil production. We should be producing about 2.5 million more barrels a day if we had continued with the Trump energy policy, which would mean that these OPEC cuts in production would have almost no impact on the price. So this is a self-imposed error, and we've got to get back to producing our own oil, gas, and coal because, Jillian, 75% of our energy that we consume in America is from fossil fuels. So doesn't it make more sense to get it from Texas and Alaska and North Dakota than Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and Iran?
Maybe a little from North Korea, too, eventually. Steve, we got to leave it there.
Good point.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jillian. Happy Easter. Take care.
Happy Passover as well. So a California mom says a school guidance counselor helped her 11-year-old daughter transition without telling anyone in her family what she's doing about it and how the school is now responding. Plus, this activist physically attacked NCAA swimmer Riley Gaines. She had just made a speech about saving women's sports. Clay Travis is in focus, coming up next.
Hi,
Well, the Biden administration is unveiling new Title IX rules that would bar federal funding for schools and colleges that enforce bans on trans girls playing on girls' sports teams. If approved, the proposal would still give schools some flexibility in some instances to ban transgender athletes depending on factors like age and sports. It is expected to face several major legal challenges. The president of a conservative watchdog group says, quote, without a doubt, institutions are going to err on the side of, quote, inclusion because they fear the wrath of the education department. The U.S. achieving the department's end goal while allowing them to maintain plausible deniability that they coerce districts into doing so. At least 20 states right now impose bans on restrictions for transgender athletes. Let's bring in Clay Travis. He is the founder of Outkick. Clay, so the Biden administration Title IX policy already prevented discrimination based on gender, but now this new rule would prevent discrimination based on gender identity. So critics say that essentially forces these sports teams to recognize the gender of student athletes. Excuse me.
Yeah, this is crazy.
Their gender identity rather than biological identity.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. This is crazy. What the Biden administration is doing is they are expanding Title IX, which has allowed women's athletics to roar to record popularity by treating men and women's athletics equally. I mean, for people out there who don't really understand how this applies on a collegiate level, for instance, it requires roughly equal scholarships for both men and women in a college setting. What they are now saying is men who identify as women should be counted as women by and large unless you're going to specifically exclude them. This is crazy, right? Men are bigger, stronger, and faster than women. We've seen this play out, whether it's the Leah Thomas situation or every sport. Bigger, stronger, faster, biologically, right? This is the reality. This is why men's and women's sports are separated. This is why there is a women's track and field gold medal for every sprint, and there also is for women. If biological men are allowed to compete against women, what we see is they directly knock women out of being able to win championships because biology is real. This is crazy. This is radical. This also is anti-everything in sports, right? We have age limits in sports. We have weight limits for boxing fights. Heck, if you're in high school, the small high school typically does not compete against the gargantuan high school. We try to insist on an equal playing field for athletes. Remember, just take it outside of this gender identity ridiculousness. A few years ago, there was a 14-year-old pitcher in Little League Baseball who was competing against 12-year-olds. He was from the Bronx. They found out that he was lying about his age. It was a massive scandal because a 14-year-old boy is going to be a lot better than a 12-year-old boy, especially when a 14-year-old boy might well have gone through puberty. This is madness. And the fact that the Biden administration is making it more likely and that reasonable Democrats won't speak out against this, I don't even see it as remotely political. It's just the essence of fair play and competition.
So somebody who agrees with you is champion swimmer Riley Gaines. She was forced to essentially barricade herself in a room at San Francisco State last night after giving a speech about saving women's sport. She posted this video on Twitter. Take a listen.
Trans rights are human rights! Trans rights are human rights! Trans rights are human rights! You crying!
She says that she was ambushed and hit physically 2 times. What do you say to that, Clay?
Well, Riley Gaines is a hero. And unlike this embarrassing Nike, for instance, using a man who's pretending to be a woman to sell sports bras and leggings, Riley Gaines is a hero. And I think the real tragedy here is that so few women's athletes have been able or willing to join Riley Gaines and speak out against this. In the same way that if you look at J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, look, no one is saying that people can't identify as whatever gender they want to identify as if they're adults and it makes them happier. But this idea that this just happened in Canada recently, a guy with a beard decided he was going to identify as a woman and set all-time weightlifting records. Again, men are bigger, stronger, and faster than women. If you allow men who have gone through puberty, who are full-fledged men, to suddenly decide that they're going to identify as women, they are going to win every single women's competition in America and around the world. So the fact that this is not being addressed and that these violent protesters, by the way, I think they should be held accountable. I hope that Riley Gaines presses charges against those people. We've moved really rapidly from I am woman, hear me roar, to anyone can be a woman and a man can become the greatest women's athlete of all time. That's where we are right now. It's wrong. People need to speak out against it.
Well, one California school board just voted to uphold this policy. It directs staff to keep a student, this is related, keep a student's gender transition secret from the student's family. The vote happened in Chico, California, and it comes as the district there is facing a lawsuit over this exact issue. What's happening is a mother there is suing. She says that a guidance counselor at her daughter's school worked to help her daughter transition, but never informed the family and actually proactively kept the information from her. She spoke at a school board meeting. Take a listen to what she said.
I understand that you are trying to find ways to create a safe environment for all children within our district, but keeping secrets from parents is not the way to do it. Treating every parent as a potential threat to their kids is wrong. It's a slippery slope to allow any adult in our schools to keep secrets from parents.
So critics like Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders say that secrecy policies are actually damaging to both kids and parents. Listen to her argument.
The idea that they are capable at that age of making some of those life-altering permanent decisions, they're just not prepared and ready to make that.
So, Clay, if we're talking about an age limit here, when do you, draw a sports analogy here, when should kids, teens, young adults be empowered to make their own decision about their gender identity and how they compete?
I don't think you should. It's a great question. And to me, this is not a difficult answer. I don't think anyone under the age of 18 should be able to begin gender reassignment surgery, should be able to take hormone blockers or anything like that. I don't think it should be permissible. I think it should be banned nationwide. And again, take it out of this gender situation. Look, if you are trying to get a tattoo, most states won't allow you to do it until you're 18 years.
Слава Украине! Друзья, всем привет! Уже идет, кажется, 26-й день войны. С момента, как Россия вероломно напала на Украину, на нас. И я нахожусь в стране, я никуда не исчез. У меня заблокировал YouTube мой канал, потому что в первые дни войны я стал размещать туда ролики, информацию о оккупантах. И YouTube посчитал это против его правил. Ну, YouTube всегда был такой платной проституткой, ну, как бы меня заблокировал. Поэтому новый канал будет по ссылке под видео в описании. Канал свое отработал, он был мил мне и дорог. Свое он отслужил, заработал мне на недвижимость, скажем так, не на одну. Я его переформатировал в первый день войны, по-моему, сразу же на, так сказать, военные рельсы, скажем. Закрыл ролики о недвижимости и стал публиковать ролики о войне. Естественно, появились рашистские тролли, они написали кучу жалоб, и канал был удален. Поэтому есть канал в Телеграме, он более активный, более адекватный. Тоже под видео в описании будет ссылочка. Это информационный канал. Я там делаю просто перепосты с разных десятков разных других каналов. Можно просто почитать новости в одном месте. По поводу... Я понимаю, что это не очень вовремя, но много людей пишут в личку по поводу недвижимости. Что будет с недвижимостью Украины? Как вообще поступать с недвижимостью Украины?
О чем я спросила?
Друзья, все будет хорошо. В итоге, в конце будет все нормально, но будут определенные этапы. Первый этап — это нужно выиграть нам войну. Мы победим однозначно, это вопрос только времени. Второй этап — это, естественно, будет определенное снижение цен. Это естественно. Послевоенная Украина будет, она уже разрушена. Некоторые города практически разрушены. Мариуполь, Харьков, например. Киеву достается. Естественно, будет определенный спад продаж, связан с тем, что многими людьми, кто уехал за рубеж, будет выставлена на продажу их недвижимость. Это факт. Но надо отметить, что у нас есть друзья. Это Европа, это Америка. У нас будет вроде как подписан или уже подписан план Маршалла. Это восстановление страны, восстановление Украины. Будет период действительно больших строек. Будет период, когда страна будет быстрыми темпами восстанавливаться. Я очень надеюсь, что будет реформа в экономическом плане. Будут снижены, некоторые налоги будут вообще отменены, и Украина станет инвестиционно привлекательной страной. Больше того, украинская армия, наша армия, украинская армия ВСУ, это будет самая боеспособная армия в Европе. Появится, скорее всего, новый военный союз наподобие НАТО. Основателем будет Украина, скорее всего. Ну, в общем, Украина будет одна из передовых стран, но нужно дать время. Нужно дать время. И по итогу, в конце концов, недвижимость будет дороже, чем до войны. То есть, когда люди там думали $1500, $2000 за квадратный метр, это, ну, типа, дорого. Поверьте, что Украина будет очень привлекательная страна. Я думаю, лет, ну, через, может быть, 2-3 года эта цена будет выше. Эта цена будет выше $2000 за квадратный метр. Но опять-таки, я не провидец, я не оракул, я эксперт. Я могу где-то что-то неправильно там предсказать, анализировать. Все мы люди, все мы ошибаемся. Но однозначно могу заверить только в том, что мы победим. Победа будет за нами. Мы отстоим свою страну, мы вернем территории. И все буде Україна. Все, иди сюда.